Right now, I don't need to be there. I need to be here, watching, waiting.
Officials say the best prospects for finding survivors are at the edges of the impact zone, where the smoke and the heat may not have been as intense. The husband of one who has survived keeps his own vigil at a hospital across town.
You can still see smoke wafting up from the Pentagon.
As soon as the first pictures flashed onto television, even though it was only Louise Kurtz's second day on the job, her husband Michael started to worry. Hours later, the hospital phoned.
I came in, teary-eyed. I didn't recognize my wife of 31 years. She's doing better. She's got 70% burns on her body.
Back at what Tracy Rowenhorst calls ground zero, touched by an occasional prayer, she intends to keep her vigil.
We're just sitting in limbo until they start bringing bodies out, I guess. Either way, dead or alive. And we'll be here until if he's the last one out, we'll be here until he comes out.
Sheila Cast for CNN, Washington.
Well, for some people, the waiting is over. Loved ones walked out of that mangled Twin Tower, shocked but alive. And one of those people was Mike Moore. He joins us now from New York City with his story. Mr. Moore, thank you so much for being here tonight. Tell us exactly where you were in that building and what happened.
I was on the 12th floor of the New York Mercantile Exchange, and I was talking to my boss. I heard a loud bang or whatever, and I said, "Wow, what was that?" And I thought it was a crane falling next door, and he said, "I think it was just a truck going by." And then my cell phone went off, and a friend of mine asked me if I was okay. And I said, "What's the problem?" And I said, "A plane just hit the World Trade Center." I looked out the window, and I could see smoke all over the place. So I went to go back to business, and I went downstairs to the trading floor and handed out some analysis, and then a bunch of people ran onto the trading floor and said a second plane had just hit the second tower. And at that point, over the announcements came, they said, "Evacuate this building immediately. Everybody get out of the building. This is not a test." And it was just kind of like a stampede towards the doors. Luckily, there weren't too many people on the trading floor at the time.
Well, Mike, just let me interrupt you there. I mean, you said you went down to that trading floor to actually do some work after you heard that first bang. I guess it wasn't apparent at that time that people had to get out.
Well, I just figured it was like a twin prop plane, a small one that had hit the tower. I figured we'd probably just continue with work. And then when the second one hit, then it was something different, and we all ran out of the building.
How much chaos was there, Mike?
Well, as soon as I came out of the building, there were people crying, and everything was dark. I guess the smoke just clouded the sun, and people were running everywhere. And I just sort of ran around the side of the building out towards the back where they have a park. And at that point, somebody said there's a third plane in the air, so we were looking in the sky to see if a third one was coming in. And we were just sort of standing around watching the second building that had gotten hit and looking upwards. The whole floor was on fire, and above that, and somebody else said they just hit the Pentagon, so we really didn't know where to go. And then we were just watching for about 15 minutes and seeing a lot of people jumping from the top floors, and then and waving for help. And then the police showed up, and a lot of emergency vehicles tried to evacuate everybody else, and I started to come a little bit closer to see if I could volunteer to help. And they just told us all to move north, and I guess that's when the first building collapsed. I didn't know, I couldn't see the first building collapse, so I thought it was a bomb blowing off on the first at the bottom, and we just saw this huge plume of smoke coming towards us. And at that point, I just started to run north because I didn't know, maybe there was some nerve gas, and I had no idea what hit the building. And then as I got up another 10 blocks, I guess, we turned around and we saw the second building just start to disintegrate from top down.
And at that point, are you in a place where you're feeling relatively safe?
Yeah, I guess we were about 10 blocks north, so we just kept heading uptown. There was nothing, everybody was just running uptown. We didn't really know whether it was a bomb that had went off on the bottom, so we just had no idea what to expect to come flying up from downtown.
Did all your friends make it out? Your colleagues?
I don't really know. I mean, I know most of the people from my building were evacuated, and I don't think my building really got hit. I haven't talked to my boss. I hope he didn't head over towards where he lives, which is kind of across the financial center, and I just hope everybody else got out okay.
Mike Moore, you did, and I thank you for sharing your thoughts and your story with us this evening. I know it's difficult. I do appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Jim?
Well, the mood in Japan somber as well. Attention focused on the search for missing Japanese workers that were employed at the World Trade Center. Financials markets in Asia's biggest economy continue to fall to new 17-year lows. Dalton Tananaka is standing by live in Tokyo with reaction to the tragedy there. Dalton?
Jim, as you might expect, as everywhere else, the attacks remain numbing to Japanese. The news of the attacks, especially sensitive because of the references to Pearl Harbor that they've been hearing on coverage in the U.S. Now, Prime Minister Junichiro Koizumi said he was outraged over the attacks and ordered his cabinet to take or tighten up anti-terrorism measures and take appropriate steps to reassure financial markets. But, of course, the human element is foremost. The government assisting in efforts to locate the missing Japanese workers who worked in the Twin Towers. Now, 20 Japanese workers, mostly from financial institutions, remain unaccounted for. There are about a dozen Japanese branch offices listed on the World Trade Center directory, and 2 Japanese are believed to have been on board 2 of the flights, 2 of the aircraft that crashed in these attacks. Now, here in Tokyo, full operations at the U.S. Embassy resumed today, and there were displays of sympathy offered at the main gate as Japanese joined the world in mourning the dead. Financial markets across Asia, generally those that were open yesterday, are experiencing a slight bounce up. Korea and Hong Kong are up slightly, but the ones that were closed yesterday, Taiwan, Malaysia, for example, off sharply. The Tokyo market kept trading throughout this whole week, and after a 6% fall yesterday, losses are deepening this day, Thursday, with export and travel-related companies being hit the hardest, but losses across the board in this market. Mike Morizumi is an analyst at UBS Warburg in Tokyo. Mike, you cover the sectors that affect the average Japanese, the growth sectors, the food, those kind of things. How would you assess overall market mood?
Well, I'd have to say sentiment is pretty bad. And it's pretty bad in terms of the consumer sentiment and in the market overall. I think everyone's taking a wait-and-see attitude.
I mean, is it really pessimistic? Guys are just, at the TSE very, very sour?
I think that they don't realize completely what the repercussions of the events that evolved yesterday actually mean longer term. So I think that there is a potential for more weakness.
It's still sinking in, you're saying?
Yes.
Now, the Tokyo economy, as we all know, has already been reeling by a number of negative factors. Go through those quickly.
Well, last week we got very weak GDP numbers. And on top of that, we've had announcement of a number of layoffs by a number of Japanese blue chip companies. And on Monday, the whole situation got complicated with the announcement of the first finding of a mad cow in Japan, which is going to hit the defensive foods and the restaurant sector as well.
So, and then this.
Right, exactly.
Now, and of course, today we heard that the current account surplus for Japan fell for the 8th straight month, another bit of negative news. Now, one contrarian point, exports account for only 10% of Japanese economy. So some might say the impact of this event in the U.S. may not have that big effect as it might have in other regions of the world. What would you say to that?
Well, that's true. Japanese corporations have localized, so they produce more overseas. And while they don't ship as many goods overseas as they did before, they still consolidate those earnings, the sales that they see in the United States and overseas. So that will impact their earnings here in Japan as well.
What would it take then, Mike, to get a turnaround in sentiment at the Tokyo Stock Exchange in this Asia's biggest stock market?
In addition to clarification on the U.S. terrorist attacks, I think that we need to see further fruits of Koizumi's restructuring packages, some concrete
movement. So back to the fundamentals.
Exactly.
All right, Mike Morizumi, analyst at UBS Warburg in Tokyo. Thank you very much. Now, as I mentioned, Asian markets pretty much in a wait-and-see attitude. Volumes very light in the markets that are trading, and with the U.S. market still closed, no leadership from there. Analysts are saying they expect more downside. Jim, back to you in the U.S.
All right, Dalton Tananaka, thanks for that report. Of course, as people are concerned about what the future is going to be in the financial markets, they are concerned as well about what is the future going to be in places like Kabul, Afghanistan. Now, in less than 2 hours, the last United Nations aid workers are scheduled to leave Kabul. The UN ordered all of its non-Afghan workers out of Afghanistan after the attacks in New York City and Washington. Osama bin Laden, a name that has been thrown around almost since the beginning of this tragedy, is known, believed to be sheltered there in Afghanistan. The UN says this move was taken out of concern and care for its workers. A UN spokeswoman, though, declining to say whether the organization was worried about being caught in the middle of a possible U.S. military operation. There was a counterinsurgency operation, the opposition in Afghanistan shelling Kabul overnight. Osama bin Laden, of course, the key suspect in the attacks right now, at the top of most terrorism experts' lists. He is based in Afghanistan.
Bin Laden, also, Jim, a member of one of Saudi Arabia's most prominent families. He does live in exile, as I think you just mentioned. And after the attacks, Prince Bandar bin Sultan, Saudi Arabia's ambassador to the U.S., was quick to put as much distance as possible between the kingdom and its most infamous son.
If this case is proven beyond doubt that the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the Arab people, the Muslim people will help to expose the identities of the perpetrators of this crime. Lately, the media mentioned Osama bin Laden as a Saudi citizen. We in the kingdom, the government and the people of Saudi Arabia refuse to have any person affiliated with terrorism to be connected to our country.
And Prince Bandar also said that Saudi Arabia pledges to pump more oil to stabilize world markets in the event that any attacks should trigger some kind of an oil crisis. For Israelis, what happened in New York and Washington is all too familiar, but as Mike Hanna reports, many are offering messages of strength along with their condolences.
A day of mourning in a region which has seen its share of sorrow. Outside the U.S. consulate in East Jerusalem, Palestinians light candles in memory of the American dead.
We do not agree that terror can achieve anything, and we feel in total sympathy with the American people, and we share their grief.
On a Tel Aviv beach, a sign expressing Israeli sadness and recognition of the deep tragedy in the United States. And a coincidence. In downtown Jerusalem, a pizza parlor wrecked in a terror bomb attack a month ago is reopened. The owner of this franchise, he visited the company's World Trade Center franchises a few months ago, has a message for Americans.
They have to be very strong, like we were months ago, and they have to continue. We cannot stop our life with this terrorism.
A parallel echoed by the U.S. ambassador to Israel, Daniel Kurtzer.
Both the United States and Israel are proving that we will not back down in the face of terrorism. We have overcome this kind of a problem previously, and we're both strong enough to do it again in the future.
Among those here, survivors of the suicide attack on August 9th.
First of all, we don't let them to change our life, to make a big mess in our life. We'll continue.
I'm here again, and I'll be here, and I'll be everywhere.
Deganit Rufua says it was important that she and her daughter Eden come back to the scene of that tragedy.
Here I show her no dust anymore. It's okay, don't worry. It's finished. The terror is gone and everything will be okay.
On the wall of the rebuilt restaurant, an inscription that reads, "In memory of the darkness that fell upon us." Mike Hanna, CNN, Jerusalem.
Also in the region, Jordan's King Abdullah II saying the attacks are a call for the international community to stop the violence in the Middle East and bring the parties back to the negotiating table.
If you had solved the problems of the Middle East, and obviously the core issue is that between the Israelis and Palestinians, I doubt very much that this incident would have taken place. And again, that was a reminder to all of us, and why I think so many of us in the international community have been working so hard to bring a stop to the violence and bring people back to the peace process, because in a vacuum, you do allow the extremists the upper hand and a chance to try things as was happened yesterday. And they will continue on trying until we can solve the problem once and for all. I hope that this is a renewed effort now by the international community to really be able to work much stronger together. There's a lot more that we can do. to break down the barriers of cooperation between different countries.